On the night of January 31st, 2026, at approximately 11:40 p.m., 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie entered her residence in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona. Less than 3 hours later, a figure carrying a standard $30 Ozark Trail backpack stepped onto the porch and deployed a localized signal jamming device. Within 60 seconds, the residence was electronically isolated, and forensic evidence, including a single set of physical markings near the entryway and an anomalous digital signature, indicated a precision extraction. For 143 days, local officials framed this as an unsolvable mystery. However, at 4:15 yesterday morning, federal investigators executed a tactical search warrant at a private residence exactly 7 miles from the crime scene, recovering a hard drive that contained not just reconnaissance data, but audio files confirming the perpetrators had intimate, pre-existing knowledge of the interior security protocols of the Nancy Guthrie home. To understand the trajectory of this investigation, one must look at the procedural disconnect during the first 96 hours. FBI Director Kash Patel confirmed that federal behavioral analysts were restricted from the Nancy Guthrie crime scene for 4 days by local authorities. During this window, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos focused the investigation on the brother-in-law of Nancy Guthrie, Tommaso Cioni. While public briefings emphasized Tommaso Cioni as the primary person of interest, the operational reality was different. The individual responsible for the extraction did not behave like a panicked intruder. They moved with the composure of someone who had practiced the route. This focus on Tommaso Cioni serves as the first hint of an institutional blind spot, one that allowed the actual syndicate to remain active within the 7-mile radius while law enforcement focused on a convenient, but ultimately flawed, target. The sophistication of this syndicate became apparent on February 2nd when an anonymous communication was routed through a Tor cloaking protocol to local media. The demand for $4 million in cryptocurrency contained specific details about structural damage to a backyard floodlight, information that was not public record. No active cameras. No alarms. No phone calls. No witnesses. The ransom demand served a dual purpose. It functioned as a financial motive to satisfy the media narrative, while simultaneously serving as a diversion to keep federal cyber analysts occupied with tracking digital footprints. While 700 agents chased the Bitcoin trail, the physical extraction vehicle, a dark gray Dodge Durango, remained within the local perimeter, shielded by a network that was already anticipating the law enforcement response. Every piece of this has an innocent explanation in isolation. But when accepting the innocent explanation requires you to ignore the entire sequence of events, the jamming of signals, the redirection toward Tommaso Cioni, and the precise knowledge of the Nancy Guthrie property, it stops being the most likely answer. The investigation reached a turning point on February 6th when a second message arrived, stating that Nancy Guthrie had suffered a fatal event. Independent forensic archivists have since identified an unusual pattern of digital sanitization among several prominent Tucson commercial figures linked to the Catalina Foothills Registry. While the public focus remained on the grief of the family, a confidential source, someone with administrative access to the syndicate's internal communications, reached out to media personnel. This source did not provide a ransom demand. They provided GPS coordinates and evidence of a 2-person operation. The assertion that time was no longer of the essence was a psychological reveal, confirming that the perpetrators were no longer interested in the ransom, but were instead managing the fallout of a fatal event that had compromised their original, more complex objective. This brings us to the behavioral pattern observed by federal profilers. The individual behind the extraction was not reacting to the investigation, they were actively monitoring it. Linguistic analysis of the secondary communication indicates the writer was in an elevated state of detachment, observing the Pima County search perimeters via commercial drone surveillance. They were literally flying drones over the search teams while Sheriff Chris Nanos assured the public that no local suspects existed. This explains why the perpetrators felt comfortable remaining within a 10-minute drive of the house. They were not hiding, they were participating in the observation of their own crime. This was the third hint of an organized structure. The access to regional real estate registries and medical delivery schedules suggested a level of data synthesis that a standard opportunistic criminal simply cannot achieve without authorized access to private databases. The forensic conclusion drawn from the evidence seized at the 7-mile compound centers on the scientific analysis of a rootless hair shaft and physical samples recovered from the hallway. Genetic genealogy confirmed that the DNA profile did not match Tommaso Cioni, nor any identified border syndicate member. It matched a local resident with a professional background in digital communications. During the tactical entry, federal agents recovered hardware that confirmed the existence of a high-level coordinator who had supplied the jammer and the surveillance schedules to the handler on the ground. The handler acted as a proxy, believing he was involved in a standard financial extraction, while the coordinator used the situation to test a digital surveillance model on a high-profile target. The Tucson raid is not the conclusion of the case, but the beginning of an investigation into the administrative architecture that authorized the use of this surveillance technology. The handler apprehended at the compound was the mechanism of the crime, but the source of the data remains at a higher administrative level. We are looking at a system that monitors regional emergency frequencies and utilizes localized data brokers to isolate targets. This network exists as a shadow infrastructure within the community, leveraging the gaps between local and federal jurisdictions to maintain its secrecy. When you examine the operational record, it is clear that Nancy Guthrie was the subject of a targeted data acquisition operation that escalated into a fatal event. The question remains as to whether this was an isolated incident or the first identified case of a larger surveillance network operating in plain sight. As the investigation continues, the focus must shift from the individuals who carried out the extraction to the entities that provided the intelligence that made the extraction possible. We have the forensic profiles, we have the digital signatures, and we have the confirmation of a tactical raid. Yet we are still missing the internal logs of the communication between the Pima County Sheriff Department and the federal agencies during those first 4 critical days. Tell me, based on the forensic evidence recovered from that 7-mile hideout, do you believe the Pima County Sheriff Department was simply negligent, or was there an active, intentional suppression of the digital jamming evidence?